Have you ever been sitting in church and the pastor announced what the scripture was going to be, and so you began to look up that scripture? But the problem was you kept looking and looking and looking, and then you decided, well, I could go to the table of contents. So you go over there and you look for it and you find it, and then you finally look it up and you find that passage of scripture. Well, by the time you get it, he's already moved on to, I don't know, 3 or 4 more other scriptures. Well, you're not alone. There are lots of people who struggle with trying to remember the books of the Bible. So I've got some ideas that might help you a bit. First of all, most people do know that the books of the Bible, that there are 66 of them. They know that it's split up between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There are 39 books in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. But did you know that within the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, but in starting with the Old Testament, that there are some divisions within that Old Testament? First of all, you have the books of the law. Now, those are also called the Pentateuch, which means it's the first 5 books, because you have that little part in there that's penta. So that refers to 5. And that would be Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's the first 5 books of the law, also called the books of the law. The next part would be the books of history, where you have Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. The books of history for the Old Testament. One of the things that I used to do, and I still kind of do, in trying to remember which book comes first and which goes where, I took the books of history and I kind of broke them up. So I had Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. And what I did there was try to remember that after the gentleman, then you have the lady. So it's Joshua and Judges, and then there's Ruth. Another little thing that I did to help me to remember the next set, which would be 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, I looked at them and I said Samuel, Kings, Chronicles. They're actually in alphabetical order if you just kind of reversed it. So the furthest one in the alphabet would be Samuel, and then Kings and Chronicles. So that way I can remember it's 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings. 1st and 2nd Samuel is first, and then 1st and 2nd Kings, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So I can kind of remember it that way because it's alphabetically, but it's in reverse order. The next 3, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, they're kind of sandwiched in there. So you have E, N-E, and E. So it's Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. So I do remember it that way. The next part, or next division, would be the books of poetry. And there's 5 of those. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Now, the way that I try to remember those is like a staircase. If you look at those words or those titles, the shortest one is on the top, which is Job. Psalms is a little bit longer, not necessarily the book, but just the actual name or the title. And then a little bit longer, Proverbs. Ecclesiastes is a little bit longer than that. Song of Solomon is a little longer than that. So it kind of forms a staircase. Next would be the major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. I try to remember Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations together. Isaiah is a pretty serious book. And then there's Jeremiah, which is a sad book because Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet. So you've got serious sad. And then there's Lamentations. Well, he's just bawling by that time, so he's sorrowful. So it's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. You have serious, sad, and sorrowful. Then there's Ezekiel and Daniel. Can't help you with those two, just have to figure out that's where they are. The next set would be the minor prophets. Now, if anybody can figure out an idea, some kind of tip, clue, something to help with the minor prophets, please send me a note. Just write it in that contact form because I'm kind of stumped on those. But anyway, the minor prophets would be Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. I don't have any ideas for those other than just keep saying it and it'll get in your head. You might want to take them and break them up into 3s or something, or maybe 4s, whichever one works better for you, and just kind of try to learn them that way. Moving on to the New Testament, where you have 27 books, and again, you have the various divisions. Most people, or many people, probably know about the first set, which would be the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't have a special way of learning the order other than that's just the way I've always heard it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So that kind of sticks in my mind. The next section would be the history for the New Testament, which would be Acts. And that's just one book. The next section is the longest section, and that's the books of the letters. They wrote a lot. Really like to write a lot. So I think about that R sound, and I'm going to begin with Romans. So we have Romans because they really like to write. And then there's 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon. Now let's go back a little bit. Romans, we're going to start with Romans because we've got that R sound going. So that's going to help you to remember that. 1st and 2nd Corinthians, your guess is as good as mine. Whatever you can think of to help you remember that that's what's coming next. But the Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, I've heard it said several years ago, probably about 15 years ago, maybe even longer than that. There was a minister at a church where we were visiting, and she said, God's electric power company. And that was, like I said, around 15 years or more ago, but I always remember that. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, because of that one statement. Now, I don't know if what she said, God's electric power company, if that was something that she made up or she heard it someplace else. I have no idea. And I can't take credit for it. It was definitely not my original thought. So if anybody knows where that came from, just put it in the contact box and let me know so I can give that person the credit for that, because it's definitely not my original thought. The next one is 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and then Titus. If you look at the word or the title Thessalonians, it's kind of long. It's got 5 syllables in it. Timothy has 3 syllables. Titus has 2. So 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is the longest one, and then it gets shorter with 1st and 2nd Timothy, and it gets a little bit shorter with Titus. So I remember it that way. The longest one is on the top, and then it gets shorter and shorter. So I remember it's 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and then there's Titus. Now, as to where Philemon falls in there in terms of just trying to remember that, I don't know. You just have to remember it. But most of the time, if you can remember some of the other books, it's going to help you to remember the ones that you don't have the tips for. Some more letters would be Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. When I look at those, I think, the first one starts with Hebrews. Okay, now this is probably a pretty silly little tip, but it works for me. The Hebrews 8J sandwiches. So I remember that Hebrews, okay, so Hebrews is going to be first. Eating J sandwiches. There's no such thing as a J sandwich that I know of. If there is, put it in the contact box and let me know. I've never heard of it, but I just needed that J in there because the J's are kind of sandwiching the rest of the things in between. The J's are on the outside, that is. All right, so you're starting with the Hebrews, and then it's got James, got a J, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Jude. So those J's are going to be on the outside. So that's how I remember that section, that the Hebrews 8 J sandwiches. And the last one, some people put it in the category with the letters, and other people put it separately as the book of prophecy. And I think that one, people can pretty much remember, Revelation as being prophecy. I think I'm going to put it over in that category rather than with the letters. So anyway, that's the book of the Bible, all 66. And I hope I said something that's going to help you to remember these books a little bit better. And if you have any questions or comments about any of the resources, please feel free to just drop it in the box and let me know what you're thinking. I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye.